Today marks 5 years since Sudan's president, Omar al-Bashir, was indicted for 3 counts of genocide. Our reporter Adama Munu has more on this conflict.
In the capital city of Sudan, in Khartoum, there is a relative calmness in the bustling marketplaces and in and around the city. But 7,000 miles away, the ongoing humanitarian and political crises in Darfur still lingers on. Sudan, since its independence from Anglo-Egyptian rule in 1956, has since been blighted in conflict. The war in Darfur began in February 2003, when both the Sudan Liberation Movement and the Justice and Equality Movement began fighting the Sudanese government, whom they accused of oppressing Darfur's non-Arab population. These include the destruction of over 3,000 villages, government forces purportedly dropping 3,700 bombs on civilian areas the size of Greater London, and the displacement of 2.87 million people. As with other conflicts, the UN has been central to peace missions in countries such as the Central African Republic, but there are some who believe that Bashir is being allowed to commit atrocities and that the UN is part of the problem. I spoke with Aisha al-Basri, who is a former spokesperson for the United Nations African Mission in Darfur, also known as UNAMID. She resigned from that post in 2013 after calling out what she describes as the conspiracy of silence of UNAMID and the UN Security Council in failing to report on the atrocities committed by the Sudanese government against its people. It was only last April that al-Basri wrote a damning critique online entitled "We Can't Say All That We See in Darfur," denouncing the UN for hiding what she called, through a web of lies, Darfur's horrible war and civilians. She has also cited several incidents where, according to her, UNAMID and the UN Security Council ignored, denied or failed to properly make public evidence of concerted attacks on civilians by the Sudanese government and associated militias. I asked her if she felt the UN Security Council was in need of reform.
The reform of the Security Council is key to the situation in Sudan, but also in other countries in the Arab and Muslim region, which are Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, etc. The fact that the Security Council is divided over security issues that has been functioning based on the foreign policy and internal agendas of each country has made it difficult for the people in the region, to enjoy some peace and stability.
However, UNAMID has repeatedly condemned the various infighting between different groups in Darfur and is currently reviewing its strategies and collaborations to maintain a viable peace mission in the face of scathing attacks against UNAMID peacekeepers. Following the controversy in South Africa last June, where the South African government refused to arrest al-Bashir for war crimes, how effectively can the UN account Bashir whilst also maintaining good order in Darfur? If not the UN, then upon whom would this responsibility lie? Adama Munu, Africa This Week.
To discuss this, we have on Skype Professor Mukesh Kapila, who is a former UN humanitarian coordinator for Sudan from 2003 to 2004. Professor Kapila is in the receipt of CBE Award from the Queen of England and is also lecturing at the Global Health and Humanitarian Affairs at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. We also have on the line Rania Reggie, who is a former human rights lawyer and currently a human rights expert on UN panel on Sudan. Last but not least, we have Mohamed Usman, who's a Sudanese journalist and opinion writer, joining us all the way from Khartoum in Sudan. Thank you so much for joining us, all of you. Rania, could I start off with you? Rania, the ICC, does it not have a lot of power to arrest? And if so, could you see it as a neutral court? And do you believe that the conflict in Sudan can be seen as a fair one under its auspices?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last bit of your question.
Do you believe that the ICC is a fair court to be able to try Sudan, look at the Darfur incident, and do it fairly?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to make a personal judgment on the independence of the International Criminal Court. Surely A lot depends on the circumstances, on the way that cases are forwarded to the ICC. So we often say of discrepancies between North and South, etc. But the reality is there are a limited number of ways through which cases could reach the ICC. The fact it doesn't have the power to arrest comes from the fact that it has no police force. However, according to its main documents, the Rome Statute, it relies on state cooperation in order to get basically indicted people in front of the ICC. And this is why we were speaking, for instance, lately of South Africa's duty to cooperate with the ICC and to deliver President Bashir. Is it the best solution to Sudan's problems? This will make us enter into the justice versus humanitarian crisis and conflict discussions, so I would rather not comment on that. We just hope that one day there will be justice for crimes in Darfur.
Well, justice. Professor Mukesh Kapila, you've seen all of this all over again. Do you believe that the UN can do a good job, and do you think Bashir has somehow been able to get away scot-free?
Well, Bashir has managed to get away scot-free up to now, but the chapter is not closed. And when you mention the UN, we have to make a distinction between the member states of the UN and the various instruments of the UN, like the International Criminal Court, which goes beyond the UN, the Security Council, and so on and so forth. So this is not a failure of the UN. On the contrary, the UN behaved exactly as they should have done, and the International Criminal Court is the best available instrument to bring justice, because certainly you can't expect the president of Sudan to be tried in his own country where justice does not exist. So I think this is not a failure of the UN, but it is definitely a political failure of individual member states who are in a position of influence on the matter of Sudan. That's where the accountability should lie. Well, for example, South Africa, why didn't South Africa not arrest him when even its own court said that he should have been arrested? That's not the fault of the UN. That's the fault of South Africa. Inconsistencies
there. Mohammed, you are on the ground in Khartoum in Sudan. Can you tell us what is the mood like, especially for those people who are living in Darfur, where these incidents are happening?
Well, as we have seen, like in recent reports from the region, violence has been on the rise, tribal conflicts in particular, and UNAMID, the UN AU mission in Darfur, which is like the second largest peacekeeping operation in the world, has been unable to effectively discharge its mandate. And this is mainly due to government restrictions on the movement of UNAMID. So I would say that the situation currently in the region is actually as worse as it was in the peak of the conflict in 2003-2004. Yet we are not seeing any improvement. And the government is insisting that UNAMID leaves the region, and I think this is something that the international community should oppose. UNAMID should stay, although it has been ineffective in carrying out its duties in protecting civilians, but it still needs to be there because it's the only international body present in the region that can report on the development of the conflict there.
Well, the development of the conflict there. Professor Mukesh Kapila, could you sort of give us a sense as to whether you think that this invisible conflict, which has been going on in Darfur, will continue, and in what shape or form going forward, especially with South Sudan and North Sudan alike?
Absolutely. I think this conflict in Sudan will continue until justice is done. When I talk to people from Darfur, and also incidentally the Nuba Mountains, Blue Nile, and other regions which are also experiencing genocidal violence, what the people say is that the deserts and bush is red with the blood of our children. We are not going to give up defending our rights, our dignity, until we are treated as equal citizens of the same country. So the only way this conflict will end is if Bashir is brought to justice and we have a new government in Sudan which is treating all its citizens with equality. When that's going to happen, I don't know. That will depend on the people of Sudan. In the end, UNAMID, which is complete a failure, and I think it should be withdrawn, because what is the point of spending $1 billion a year and the violence is getting worse? In my opinion, I think what should happen is we should be strengthening civil society in Sudan, in all parts of Sudan, Arab civil society and other ethnic groups and so on, so that they can bring back democracy to the country. There will be continued violence in Sudan until Bashir is brought to justice and we have a new form of governance in Sudan.
Well, a new form of governance in Sudan is a wish, a hope and a desire. But Rania, could you sort of put in context for us as to whether you believe that the international community as a whole would have to do more? And would you think that efforts from the United States and the UK may make the difference?
I definitely think so, because if we say of the US or the UK, if we speak of them specifically, they are members. They are two of the core members of the 5 members of the Security Council, and so their power to affect change within the Security Council is much greater than other states, and their power to make bilateral pressure on Sudan is much greater also. The international community has a large responsibility, and I'm not talking about military interventions. I'm talking about the responsibility to protect as a wider concept. So basically, things such as legal reforms, things such as the human rights violations that go on with impunity every day, and how bilateral relationships are not affected by this. We also laws in Darfur in Sudan becoming stricter and stricter. A few days ago, the government gave the National Security Service in Central Darfur a green light, basically, to do anything to maintain security. This, from our knowledge, means impunity for human rights violations. The international community's responsibility is not only in relation to military interventions. I hope not. It is also in terms of monitoring and prioritizing human rights violations over things like trade in their bilateral relations.
Well, Mohammed, you on the ground in Khartoum in Sudan, you are the heartbeat of what's going on around you. Do you see any difference between what's happening now in Sudan compared to what happened with Gaddafi in Libya? And would you expect the international community to do more?
Well, there is a reason why popular protests in Sudan over the last 2 years have largely failed to bring about the change in regime that we have seen happening in other Arab countries or the Arab Spring. Part of the reason for this is that the government has resorted to extreme levels of brutality in countering these protests. Just in September 2013, street protests erupted all over the capital and other cities. What the authorities did is that they massacred more than 200 people in the space of few days. So this brutality, unfortunately, has succeeded in putting out the momentum of these protests. But it is really difficult to predict when such things may happen again. But as Mr. Kabila said, it all depends on the Sudanese people and their will. The international community can only extend support to activists within Sudan who are working to achieve change and to bring about democratic transformation.
But that democratic transformation that you're referring to there is one that's very, very challenging. Let me put this to Professor. Professor Mukesh Kapila, are you convinced that racism might be at the heart of this conflict? And if that is the case, can you sort of provide a solution as to a way forward?
Oh, absolutely. I think racism was at the foundation of the ethnic cleansing, which ended in the genocide in Darfur, and equivalent violence is taking part in other peripheral areas like the Nuba Mountains and the Blue Nile. How to put an end to this is by getting rid of the racists. And as we commemorate the 5th anniversary of the only head of state in the world indicted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide, well, I'm afraid the answer is very clear. He has to be removed. Now, this is not saying the international community has to do more. I don't believe in the international community. The international community is this vague instrument which means nothing. When the African Union has itself given immunity to Bashir, when Africans themselves are not standing up for their own rights and behaving in this disgraceful manner, then you can't turn to America and the UK to be doing more. What more do you want them to do? Invade the country? That's completely not feasible. We know that doesn't work. It is up to the Sudanese people to rise up. I believe, unfortunately, that probably Bashir will either go through natural processes, but I don't want him to die because I want him to turn up in Hague and face justice. But if he's going to be removed through the use of force, then so be it. But this must be by the people themselves. Well, I think the people have to rise.
Professor, rising up, as you say, you're looking for a revolution. That will take time, and who knows. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for in this episode. I want to thank all my guests for joining us and to you at home for watching. Do remember that you can keep up with us on Twitter by following at the Islam channel by using the hashtag #AfricaThisWeek. You can also send us an email with your comments to africathisweek@theislamchannel.tv. We'll be taking a break for Eid Festival. We'll be back to our usual time on Saturday the 26th of July at 4 p.m. with repeat sessions on Sunday the 27th of July at the same time. We want to wish all our Muslim viewers an early Eid Mubarak. Have a good evening.